There's something about the way Wes Streeting does interviews that I really like. He doesn't take any crap.
All they're interested in is the party politics, bashing the other side and campaigning, and they have absolutely no interest in governing.
I think the Tories are making a terrible mistake. Bad knock on generic. I just don't think they're very good. Why are we talking about the fall of a government, Rory? We've only just got the Labour government. This episode is powered by Fuse Energy. And Fuse, Rory, they are at it again. They've got another giveaway for anyone who switches their electricity at getfuse.com/politics and uses the referral code politics.
5 lucky switchers will win a copy of our books, Alastair, and we'll even sign them with a personal message too.
And that means if you've got children, we can do children's books. And if you've got adults, you want an adult's book, we do adult's book. And this is a great time to think about changing your electricity supplier to Fuse, because as of October the 1st, the energy price cap has gone up again. Average annual bill up 10%.
And Fuse's tariffs are cheaper than any of the big 6 competitors. So hopefully you'll be able to save on your electricity bill this winter if you switch. So go to getfuse.com/politics now to find out all the details.
And Fuse are a green electricity supplier. They generate power from their own solar and wind farms. They invest 100% of profits into building more renewables. So they really are trying to make a difference for the planet.
So download the Fuse app now. And crucially, use the referral code politics after signing up for a chance to win our books. Deadline for entry is 3rd November. Visit getfuse.com/politics to learn more.
It takes just 3 minutes to download the app and sign up, and Fuse will handle everything with your old electricity supplier for you. That's getfuse.com/politics.
Welcome to the Restless Politics Question Time with me, Rory Stewart.
And me, Alastair Campbell. Now, Rory, here's a question you're going to love. Kaya, Washington. Why is the NHS allowed to be used as a political pawn? Surely it would be better if it was handled as a bipartisan issue. Thoughts? We had lots of questions on this health review, and whether the government shouldn't try to bring in the opposition on it.
I think with the NHS and with adult social care and with transport, you're looking at things which clearly need 10, 20-year plans. And therefore, one great advantage of doing cross-party stuff is you're less likely to have it derailed by a new government. The second advantage of it, as we found with trying to fund social care, is that funding always requires tax increases. And the first thing that happens, so Theresa May tried to work out a way of funding social care and immediately was attacked by Jeremy Corbyn, who called it a death tax and basically lost the 2017 election on the back of it. We've seen Rishi Sunak's health and social care levy reversed again by the incoming Labour government, which I guess they're probably regressing at the moment, because that would have been a very hefty increase in VAT, which could have been very useful for them for funding things. So I really do think these things could happen. And it's also worth looking at Sweden, because Sweden is very dramatic in the way that many of the core issues, and you can see this in the way that prisons are run in Sweden, you can see it in public health and the way that COVID was done in Sweden, big issues removed from politicians and given to independent bodies, which really allow them to take much more radical, bold lines that would be pretty difficult for politicians to take. So why isn't there the appetite for that? I mean, there must be a reason why, apart from obviously not liking Rory Stewart, but what's the reason why they're not bringing together big cross-party commissions on these things?
I think what Wes Streeting seemed to be saying when he set out the process of this review for this 10-year plan, and they've created this new website where people can feed in their ideas and their responses and their thoughts. Now, some of them are just people who are going to basically troll the government, but some of them I think will be genuinely interesting. And he did say, I saw an interview he did where he did say he would more than welcome ideas coming from the Conservatives on this. Now, when it comes to it, though, I think whenever people say, why can't we take the politics out of something, they basically say, why can't we take the politics out of our lives? Because the truth is that healthcare is a very, very political issue. Education is very political. How we treat crime and punishment, these are political issues. So I think I would prefer, rather than having a cross-party commission, I do think, we've talked before about citizens' assemblies and so forth, I think actually building a totally different structure that isn't just about the main political parties would be the best way to do this. And if you're talking about 10 years, they're talking about producing this plan with, by middle of 20 spring of 2025, say, well, that gives you quite a lot of time.
Yeah,
Alongside that, I'd love to see a citizens assembly on the future of healthcare.
yeah, I think that's right. Institutions is the thing to think about. When you were talking about citizens' consultations, I think the government should be learning from Audrey Tang, the digital minister in Taiwan that we interviewed on Leading.
Yeah.
They set up a much more interesting system than just a website. The forms of consultation they were doing, and actually a lot of it was about rural healthcare, was very clever, partly because of some of the ruses going on. So she was able to get junior civil servants to contribute anonymously to these chat forum and to propose ideas that their bosses had squashed almost by pretending to be ordinary members of the public. And a
Right.
lot of what they learnt through doing this is that the convening is essential. The way in which the citizens are organized, the way in which you use machine learning to group these ideas, the way in which the discussion forums are taken forward is vital. It's not enough just to drop an idea in from time to time. And then citizen assemblies, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's so fascinating because that really does take the politics out of it, much more than putting Tories and Labour together on a panel. Because they aren't elected, because they're not running for election, they can approach the ideas, even if they're not great experts, just much more naturally and much more objectively.
I also thought Wes Streeting was interesting in the way that he talked about he intends to rely on experts. He actually intends to. He was very deliberately making a difference between the Michael Gove, we're fed up of experts. He wants expert opinion. But there's something about the way Wes Streeting does interviews that I really like. He doesn't take any crap. I think there's something very defensive about a lot of the Labour ministers, but Wes just sort of basically says, no, here's what I'm going to say, and here's how I'm going to say it. And there's a confidence to what he says. And he accepts, by the way, he says, he was asked a question, you've been in government now. Um, can you honestly say that through the winter there will not be people lying on trolleys waiting to be seen in A&E? And he said, worse than that, there will be people right now lying on trolleys, and that is what we've got to fix, and it's going to take a long time to fix it. He's got a very, very, I think the other ministers could learn a lot from watching the way he pushes back on some of these interviews.
Is he able to use the fact that Rishi Sunak, during the campaign, had the same vision for healthcare reform? In other words, if you watched Sunak's debates against Starmer, Sunak was saying, we've got to move money from hospitals to the front line. We've got to do more preventative care, which is exactly the West Streeting vision. Do you think he can use some of that to try to spike the guns of Conservative attacks a bit? Or is the problem that as soon as Sunak steps down, the new Tory leader will come in and ignore everything that Sunak said?
I certainly think that it is extraordinary to think that Rishi Sunak is a kind of moderate compared with Jenrick or Badenoch. And I think you and I both know that Rishi Sunak did not have much time for either in terms of their politics or their competence as ministers. But I think that isn't a bad thought, actually, because I was at this health conference the other day, and the one thing that has definitely got through to that sector, to people working in that sector, and once you've done that, then you can take it to the public. And I think it is starting to get through. I can now quote verbatim things that they're saying. They want to move from hospital to community, analog to digital, and they want to have a focus on prevention rather than cure. Now, that's a very, very good framing. And as you say, it's not dissimilar. So once you've got that framing, if we go back to our citizens' assembly structure, you would probably say, okay, there's a group over there. They're going to work on the how do we get from hospital to community. There's that lot. We're going to bring in the tech people because they know how to do this analog to digital. And over here, we're going to talk about prevention. That's where we talk about mental health. That's where we talk about fitness and obesity and all this stuff. So I think he's got a big challenge, which came out in the Aradaza report that we talked about. But I've got a feeling about West Streeting that he's got a plan that he's not fully telling us yet, but he's working towards implementing it.
One more thing on healthcare. When they talk about analog to digital, there's so much that technology can do. But in order to do this and really benefit from the fact that the NHS has this enormous swarm of data, I mean, it's almost unique in the world in just how much data it has, there are some very interesting questions around data privacy that
Mm.
need to be overcome. And the Conservative government from 2010 onwards kept saying that the NHS can really leap the world because it has access to all this data. But of course, what happened is when they began bringing in digital companies to try to harvest this data and gather this data, privacy campaigners became very anxious, including your friend David Davis, who we interviewed on Leading. I remember being a big critic of this. And
Mm.
so one of the challenges I think that West Reading will face is he's going to have to have this very, very old battle, which is at the heart of so much of the problem with uh, social media at the moment, which is striking this balance between the huge benefits that you can get from accessing people's data and using machine learning to go through anonymized data to find patterns in order to massively improve health, against, on the other hand, people's concerns about their privacy.
Yeah, I think that is a really, really big problem, which the government is going to have to work through. And the NHS app idea, which Wes was talking about, and by the way, I've used sort of digital stuff in relation to my own healthcare, but I think I would worry about the extent to which that can then be sort of bundled, taken, used in different ways. And, so the government's got its work cut out in explaining that.
This is the key, isn't it? And there are so many advantages. And how rational are these concerns? And what exactly is it that you're worried about, Alastair? And, what exactly they're going to be doing with this stuff? I guess if you were working for Palantir, or you were somebody who was much more optimistic about technology, you'd say that a lot of these anxieties are very unfocused and a little bit kind of superstitious, and the benefits are obvious. Here's a Jim Waterson posted on Twitter. I hate doing personal posts, but when my mum was dying last year, NHS data sharing failures and prioritizing GDPR, that's the data protection, over pain relief, repeatedly left her in agony. In desperation, I began to build a Google Doc of her records linked to a QR code for doctors to scan. Systems broken. And that got 2,500 likes on Twitter. That was actually him replying to Wes Streeting.
Mm.
I'm going to move the question on with a question from Jenny, and which I'm going to self-interestedly answer myself. So Jenny asks, what can we learn from the Tory leadership candidates about how Parliament and politics is changing? And here are a couple of things I noticed which maybe political commentators haven't made enough of. The first is that Jenrick and Badenoch are very recent MPs. I mean, I was only elected in 2010, but I was in before them, right? I was in a parliament before them. Secondly, they were both people who were very much not on the Rishi Sunak plan. So Jenrick was not put into Rishi Sunak, didn't make him Secretary of State, and he resigned in protest at Rishi Sunak's Rwanda policy, thought it wasn't tough enough. And Badenoch, famously, as we kept saying, wasn't really rated by Rishi Sunak, and there was a huge briefing war between them. So I think one thing we can learn is that the old days of politics, where often leadership candidates were people who'd been in politics for 20, 25 years and were senior, loyal figures in previous people's administration, in the way that John Major was in relation to Margaret Thatcher, or Gordon Brown was to Blair, maybe the loyal bits pushing it back. I was suddenly a senior trusted member of the administration, or even Theresa May to David Cameron, has been replaced by a very, very strange new world where British politics begin to feel more like Dutch politics, where a lot of the leading figures have been in Parliament for such a short time. Well, Keir Starmer only
Mm.
coming in himself in, I think,
Yeah,
2015, Rishi Sunak in
yeah.
2015. What does it tell us about politics that, whereas in the past, that the people making it to the top had often been in Parliament, Macmillan or Eden or all these kind of people, or let
Mm.
alone Wilson, Callaghan or Heath?
I don't know what it says. I really don't know. Does it say that people are constantly looking for the new? Does it say that the people get bored with people more quickly than they used to? I don't know what it says. I don't think it's very good though.
It isn't good, because you would have thought the obvious candidate in the Conservative context would have been Jeremy Hunt. In Parliament a long time, had a lot of big cabinet posts, last chance to the Exchequer, but instead of which you have these people who are relatively junior. I mean, definitely junior.
Mm. I think the Tories are making a terrible mistake. I think whichever they choose, I could be wrong about this, but I think whichever they choose, of Badenoch and Jenrick, I just don't think they're very good. I think their ideas are kind of plot losing. I think they exacerbate the problems that led to the Tories losing rather than address them.
And they give a gift to Keir Starmer, don't they? Because if he's struggling with his narrative, and if he was elected largely because people were fed up with the Tories, getting a non-credible Tory leader in as a fantastic opportunity for him to keep reminding people every week in Parliament, at least I'm not this lot, which he can't do
Yeah.
and hasn't been able to do for the last few weeks.
I mean, Rishi Sunak really has sort of vanished from the scene, hasn't he? I mean, he sort of pitches up to Prime Minister's questions. He clearly is a bit of an ordeal. Um, he's really not. He's not really putting the hours in. Let's be honest.
Good question, I think, Alastair, from India, which is it is the 100th anniversary as we record this, of the fall of the first Labour government. So, Alastair, over to you. Any thoughts on the fall of that Labour government 100 years ago and maybe some parallels that might be interesting for today?
Why are we talking about the fall of a government, Rory? We've only just got the Labour government. No, it is. The only reason I'm kind of even aware of this anniversary, well done, India, for knowing that it's the anniversary, is because I spent the Saturday with David Blunkett, who said to me, David's a great one for Labour Party history, and he said it's almost exactly 100 years since the first minority Labour government fell. So this was the government led by Ramsay MacDonald, Chancellor Philip Snowdon, who the two of them went on to be something of almost hate figures really within the Labour movement, because they formed the national government, which relied more upon opponents of Labour than it did of Labour. But it is remarkable. I've said to you before, Rory, 3 times as many Etonian prime ministers as Labour prime ministers, and Ramsay MacDonald was the first. 100 years. So I think it was October the 29th, 1924 was the election, and it lasted about 9 months before they fell. Did some interesting things on welfare, interesting things on housing. He was the first prime minister from a working class background, had no university education, governed without a majority in either house. But I guess the connection that people might be making, and Philip Snowdon, the Chancellor, is that he was somebody fairly left wing. Actually came from my part of the world, Cowling near Keighley, and he worked in Burnley for a few years and eventually he was MP for Blackburn, then he lost, then he was MP for Colne Valley. So always around that kind of part of the world.
Quite a modest background. His father was a weaver. He left school at 15 and became an insurance office clerk, and then passed the civil service exams, didn't he?
Yeah. People think he was posh because he became a Viscount. So people think Viscount Snowdon, but actually he became a Viscount after the event of his political career.
So he came in, he had a reputation of being pretty left-wing, in love with socialism, but then as the Chancellor, he set about trying to cut taxes and tariffs to balance the budget.
Yeah, he was pretty orthodox, it's fair to say, as Chancellor. And that's why ultimately he and MacDonald was expelled from the Labour Party because of his role in the national government from 1931 to 1935. But that first, if you're a Labour person, it's quite a thing to think it was just 100 years ago that first Labour government was formed, and actually managed to achieve quite a few things, even though, as I say, they had no majority either in the Commons or the Lords. So the message for Labour today is when you've got a big majority, you can do lots of things. So let's see them done.
Well, it's also the strangeness of politics in that period, because he, as we went into the late 20s, early 30s, the junior Labour minister who was pushing for high spending on public works to combat unemployment was Oswald Mosley, who then went on, obviously, to found the British Union Fascists.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, obviously, Snowdon was pushing for this very, very kind of austerity policy. And as you say, he was then kicked out of the Labour Party and attacked as Bolshevism run mad, and became this sort of hated Viscount.
And talking of Bolshevism, Rory, the other famous thing that happened around that period, and showing that some things never change, was the Daily Mail and fake news. They published this letter that became known as the Zinoviev letter, suggesting that Labour was getting ready for the imminent revolution and communism was going to take over. So very, very interesting period in history.
We should do something on that, actually, because it's a really interesting example of fake news that was so successful that historians had to reinforce again and again and keep pointing out to people today that
it was a
along
forgery.
with the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is another famous one of the period.
Yeah.
was a
Yeah.
massive forgery. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the Daily Mail spreading lies about Labour. Hey, what's new?
Means testing benefits. Lewis Craven. With the recent change in the winter fuel allowance to become means tested, should the government be looking at personal independence allowance and disability living allowance as the next two benefits that should be means tested? There's an amazing figures now coming on disability living allowance. The number of people who are now receiving disability benefit has doubled
Mm.
since 2019. And this is not, you might have thought it's just because of COVID, it's another long COVID story, but it doesn't seem to be, because it's not happening anywhere else in Europe, or in any comparable state. It may be something to do with the cut in other welfare benefits, which makes the disability living allowance that much more valuable.
Mm.
But it is a huge problem for the Labour government going into the budget, working out how they're going to pay for it, because the welfare bill is going up and up and up, and they really want to get those people back into work. But presumably that's going to be pretty unpopular with a lot of the Labour backbenchers if they try to push ahead with Tory plans on how to do that.
I think this thing about getting people back into work, that was the other big thing that came through the Darcy report and also through what Wes Streeting was saying yesterday, is the health service playing a more productive role in actually getting people, helping to get people fit for work. You talk about the budget, Rory. The other thing that happened last week was when the inflation figures came out and they were better than expected. And then it was announced that this is the set of figures when we talk about index linked benefit payments. This is the set of figures that will decide those those rises in benefits. And the reason why it sort of sent a shiver down my spine is because one of our most difficult periods early in government was when we were patting ourselves on the back about how well we'd done to keep inflation low. And what it meant was that there was a tiny, I think it was 75 pence rise in the basic state pension. And we ended up having to change it because there was such a kind of outcry over the fact there was this pitiful, minimal rise in the pensions. As the government is finding, taking on the pensions is never really much fun. So I wonder whether they might tweak that along with all the other stuff they're going to tweak in the budget.
Yeah, it's likely that pension benefit, because the triple lock goes up much more than other benefits. But we're in a situation now where 1 in 10 working age people are currently receiving benefits. And in the Welsh
Mm.
Valleys and Blackpool, it's 1 in 4, with older people mostly getting disability benefit for physical issues and younger people for mental health issues. And I'm not sure that the Darcy stuff is going to be quite enough. I mean, it sounds great if you say it quickly that, we can work to improve people's health and that be the way to get them back into work. But the scale of the problem, the doubling of the bill, doubling the number of people on disability benefits in 3 years, I don't think you're going to
Mm.
turn it around just by therapy.
Yeah, talking of stats, this health conference I was at, I was speaking on, I was sharing a platform with Richard Meddings, who's the current chair of NHS England. He was saying that 1 in 8 people in Britain have a contact with primary care every single week. That felt very, very high to me.
Well, it's amazing. I mean, there are 350 million GP appointments a year for a country of, whatever it is, 70 million people.
He also said there is a huge percentage, I can't remember the exact figure, but it was a big number of GPs who will be retiring in the next few years. So where we're going to get all these new GPs, they're going to have to be, dare I say that some of them may have to come from the European Union, Rory.
Yes, and from other countries too. Just to come back to this question, so spending on health and disability benefits is up 31%. So this question around means testing from Lewis Craven, I mean, is there any possibility at all that the government would look at means testing personal independence allowance and disability living allowance, or do you think that's just inconceivable for a Labour government?
Well, I guess it goes back to your point about whether a Tory government is more able to do things like prisons.
Right.
So I don't know. I think I hadn't really thought of it. I think that, look, the fact that the first big fight they took on, I think they might be regretting it as their first big fight, but the first big fight being the changes to the universal winter fuel allowance. Maybe that is a path they eventually will have to go down, but I think they'll be very reluctant to do so. Now, Rory, my final question.
Yes.
Georgia Gibbons. At your show, you had a tribal buzzer for Alastair, but why is being tribal such a bad thing? Isn't there a need for some tribalism?
Goodness gracious me.
So just tell our listeners who weren't at our shows what this dastardly plan was.
Firstly, just quickly, I mean, given we've been quite serious on policy right through question time, the shows were amazing. I mean, really extraordinary. We ended up with over 13,000 people coming to see us in the O2 with a setup as if we were on a boxing stage, so it was in the round. And I had this wonderful buzzer, this red buzzer, which I could hit, which put up the word tribal all the way around the thing.
Yeah, that was dramatic, wasn't it? When the word tribal went up in light.
Yeah, amazing. Lovely article in The Economist, slightly teasing us, saying that there was a moment where we got a little bit more serious in the show when we were showing Dan Needle's tax projection statistics on a screen to 13,000 people in the O2, and people in the audience were shouting, more, more.
But anyway, so you're tribal. So you basically, and you kept doing this show of hands about whether I'm tribal.
I think it is a problem because I think that I think you're an interesting balance, because I think you do get the balance right between being profoundly, passionately tribal, pro-Labour, anti-Tory, but also being interested in policy. But the reason I really dislike it is when you get to the Liz Truss extreme, which is increasingly normal now in Parliament, all they're interested in is the party politics, bashing the other side and campaigning, and they have absolutely no interest in governing. And I'm afraid I felt this with people like Kwasi Kwarteng, and I catch a little bit of a whiff of this with some of the people in Keir Starmer's cabinet too. You can see just how triggered they are by the whole idea of Tories and how little they want to get involved in conversations about what to do. Because the whole culture of the House of Commons, many of them have been, well, they boast of joining political parties when they're in their early teens, of having been student politicians, and they just love thinking about the business of opinion polls and leaflets through doors. And they're not awfully interested in discussing details of adult social care.
Yeah, maybe we should do this one, Roy. As I said, that was the final question, but this is related. Marina Cantacucino, MBE, says podcasts are the new rock and roll. Packed out stadiums, T-shirts, merchandise, celebrity punters. How do you stop all this going to your head? Is it going to your head, Rory? No.
I hope not. I hope not. Maybe it is. Have I become pretty unbearable? Do you think we're becoming pretty pompous?
No more unbearable than you were at the start.
What does Grace say about you after coming to see you in the O2? I noticed she turned up with a whole team who just irritates you. She was wearing a Rory Stewart T-shirt. Merch,
she was. Yeah, all her friends were wearing Alastair T-shirts. She was wearing Rory. No, I don't think she thinks it's gone to my head. I think the reason why I don't think it's gone to my head is because I find it very, very weird. I found the whole thing weird. I genuinely, there's part of me, I'm sitting there. There was one point in which I was actually talking. And I was thinking, what are they all doing here? Why have they all come out and paid money? So no, I don't think it's gone to my head. I did love thinking that in that dressing room that I was, that Paul McCartney had been there and Sting had been there and Rocks, Anyway, it was thoroughly enjoyable. It was great to spend some time with Anthony Scaramucci and Katy Kay as well. And yeah, we had 30,000 people. More than 30,000 people over the course of the 10 days, whatever it was. And I think the two big takeaways from me are those 30,000 people, by a massive majority, think the Tories have made a terrible mistake in ruling out James Cleverly. And they also still have a lot of goodwill for Labour, but they want better and they want more.
I was also really struck by the fact that although they really enjoyed some of our showmanship and they loved you playing the pipes and jokes around pots and things, just how much appetite there is for serious conversation.
Oh, yeah, they wanted the serious stuff, yeah.
And also how young the crowd was. I mean, I think that's the other thing that was surprising people. Well, Alastair, thank you very much.
See you soon. Bye.